Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you, Lord, for everyone who could show up today. I'm not really expecting much more in terms of numbers, but I just pray, Lord, that while we are gathered here in your name, that you would still bless this time, bless this fellowship, Lord. For those who are not, who could not make it, I just pray, Lord, that you will watch over them as they go on their journey, as they go on their way. The world has been quite crazy lately. Lots of happenings, a lot of dangers and natural disasters, as well as just people doing crazy things. And I just pray, Lord, that you would really just watch over them and bring them safely home, so that they can once again enjoy a time of fellowship together. I just pray all this in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Like I said, during we have more of a smaller group. I don't mind that much that you guys kind of just sit down and relax. It's kind of it doesn't feel as I don't know, as I don't know, it just feels kind of strange when you don't have that many people to stand up. But of course, if you want to stand up, you're all welcome to stand up and sing. Otherwise, you feel free to just sit back in your chairs as we sing some praises. We're going to be singing "Your Grace Is Enough."
rescuing. Oh, how infinitely sweet this great love that has redeemed. As one we sing. Oh, praise Him. Oh, praise Him. He is holy. He is holy. Oh, praise Him. Oh, praise Him. He is holy. He is holy. Oh, praise Him. Oh, praise Him. He is holy. He is Savior, I come, quiet my soul. Remember, redemption till where your blood was spilled for my ransom. Everything I once held dear, I count it all as lost. Lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross. You were as I, tempted and tried. The Word became flesh for my sin and death. Now you're risen. Everything I once held dear, I count it all as lost. Lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross.
All right, let's get started with the word of prayer before we move on to the message. Dear Father, Lord, thank you so much for just everything that you give, Lord, the breath of life that we have, the moments of peace, of joy, of comfort that we can experience in this life. Since this is a fallen world, a world full of sin and darkness, we know that there are going to be ups and downs. Life is kind of like a roller coaster. There's always good with the bad. But I just pray, Lord, that we would stay positive. We would stay hopeful, because we know that we serve a living God, a God who's in control of all things, a God who takes care of us, Lord, who loves us. And even if we leave this earth, we have nothing to fear. We instead have everything to gain. And I just pray, Lord, that we would just spend our time on this earth wisely, use what we can to do your will, to serve you, to glorify you, and to be, inspired by that, to be comforted by that, to feel hope and joy and peace that only you can give, Lord, by following your will. I just pray all this in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so welcome back to our weekly Sunday message, as I like to always say. As always, I'd like to start with a summary of what we talked about last time. And it's especially important during these summer months, as members of our group are going to just kind of be coming and going. We're going to be seeing some people return and maybe see some people go, but throughout all that, I'll always keep you guys, up to date with the way our messages have been going. So last time, if you weren't here, we hit a major point in the history of ancient Israel. We saw a new king rise to power. And of course, this is the most famous king of the Bible, or at least maybe the second most famous if you count Jesus Christ as the most famous king. But regardless, this name of this king continues on even throughout the New Testament. And yes, this is we're talking about King David. Of course, we saw King David take the throne of Israel, becoming Israel's second king. Now, how David became king was quite unusual. It was a very long story, as we kind of talked through it. After all, when we talk about kings, it's usually the royal bloodline kind of deal, right? Most times a king, and then their children take the throne. The king usually has an heir of some sort take the throne. And so Saul was the first king, and I'm sure people would have expected one of his sons to be the next king. But of course, God had other plans for that. Since Saul was disobedient, God prepared a new king through the anointing of David, son of Jesse. Last week, we talked about how David's journey to become king was a long and difficult one. He was anointed around the age of 15 or so kind of around the age of you guys. So he was chosen by God at a young age to become king when he was just, a young teenager. But he would have to go through so much before he would be recognized as king. We saw that he had to slay Goliath. We saw that after he slayed Goliath, he was sent as basically a military leader to go into battle against the Philistines. Then Saul became displeased and out of jealousy tried to kill David several times, hunted him down as long as he lived. And because of that, David had to kind of just run away and live in the land of the Philistines, away from his home, away from his family, all because of Saul. Saul's selfishness, Saul's foolishness. And then it finally happened. The moment we've all been waiting for. Saul dies in battle. And David then is able to take the throne. According to what we read, David took the throne at the age of 30. Now, our message was focusing on David's faith throughout that journey. No matter how difficult things became for David, he never gave up on life. He never gave up on God. You can read the book of Psalms for that. Many of these Psalms were written by David. You can see in his Psalms just how frustrated he was at his circumstances, how sometimes he was depressed and angry and frustrated at his circumstances, at how everyone wants to kill him, or a lot of people, he has a lot of enemies and things like that. But he also was hopeful that God would save him from his troubles, no matter what he experienced, no matter what he faced. So in times of trouble, I always talk about this, but we could do well to read the book of Psalms ourselves. It's very comforting and encouraging to see that, even people of the Bible, we get to read about their life story and we think, wow, that's amazing. But we also get to see some of their inner thoughts and see, they're just people. They struggle with some of the problems that they face in life. So David, he made it through hard times, and we can really give that how he made it through those hard times by his faith in God. Now we're going to get to our message for today. Since it's summer and there are less people, I figured I might as well try to be a bit more experimental, go through some of the Bible stories that we don't normally get to talk about as much. These stories are harder to apply to our lives, so it's also harder for me to really write about them and talk about them, but hopefully we'll still be able to get something out of them. So just kind of as a warning ahead of time, in case this whole thing doesn't make any sense. That's because I'm trying to try something new, branch out a bit. Our first story here is going to take place chronologically before the story that we talked about last week. So we're just going to go back in time just a little bit, before David becomes king over all Israel. We're going to read a portion to kind of introduce our story for today. This is from 2 Samuel, and this is chapter 2, 8 to 11. Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. The length of time that David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months. All right, so this kind of, I'm making this a bit more specific about what we talked about last week. Last week I just said, David became king, but we kind of jumped over a lot to reach that point. But realistically, after Saul died, it wasn't just, okay, Saul's dead, let's make David king, right? Because like I said, when we talk about kings, it's always the royal bloodline. So after Saul died, it wasn't a quick switch to David's reign. David didn't just instantly become king over Israel, despite how we kind of made it look like that last week. It was a gradual process. So first, David did become king, but not quite king over all Israel. He got to become king of just one tribe, the tribe of Judah, which is arguably one of the bigger tribes. It says that he was here, it said he was king of Judah for 7 years, 6 months. So before he became king of all of Israel, he still had 7 years of experience as king over just kind of part of Israel. David was from Judah, and as we saw from the songs that were sung about him, he's pretty popular with the people. And so people, just accepted him as king pretty easily, as long as they're from Judah. But the rest of Israel did not follow suit. Saul and some of his sons were dead. We talked about that. Saul and 3 of his sons died in that battle, but technically his house lived on. So Abner, Saul's commander, took one of the remaining sons of Saul. I'm not entirely sure how many more sons there are, but by the end of this, there are no more sons. This is one of them, at least at the moment. And he made this guy king over Israel. I don't think anyone has really heard about this king. His name is such a pain to pronounce that I'm glad he isn't a more famous king. But he is. But this is what we saw, right? And so, as you would expect, civil war. Those who served under David fought against those who once served Saul. So we're going to read on. This is verses 12 to 16. Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool, one group on the other side. Then Abner said to Joab, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us." "All right, let them do it," said Joab. So they stood up and were counted off, 12 men for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head, thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they all fell down together. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Hazurim. All right, so this is not your usual war scene. I've talked about this before, but when you think of war, you may think of, the spies being sent out to spy the land, maybe find weaknesses, to stabilize the government. Maybe you think of like encampments, setting up camp and armies, just rallying together for battle. Or maybe you can think of generals and strategies and tactics. They're trying to, in order to win the battle, win the war. But this is very different. This is more of what you expect out of a smaller feud, right? As we're reading this, it reminds me of like the family war in Romeo and Juliet, a story that you might have read in school, or just in general. You might have seen some kind of movie or play about it. Or if we're talking maybe more modern terms, personally, when I think of this scene where you see this pool of water and you see these two groups, these two houses discussing this, it reminds me of I used to watch a lot of Hong Kong movies from the old Hong Kong movies from the 80s and 90s, and they love to talk about like the Hong Kong triads. And so in those movies, it'd always be like they have just like one group from one of the gangs and the other group from the other gang, and they're kind of just like having meetings in like a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and discussing things, and maybe they'd send out some of their men to fight as representatives, or if you're more accustomed to like the Japanese side of things, like the Yakuza of Japan, it's always about sort of like a, I don't know, gang fight type of thing. That's the kind of image I get when I read this chapter. So basically, what do we see here? There's Abner. He's Saul's commander and his men, and then there's Joab, who at the time was basically David's commander, and he's got his men. And these two groups, they just, it's not like they're like marching off into battle. It's these two groups. They just simply agree to meet face to face. They go to Gibeon and they're there. And then they don't just start charging at each other and say, "Yeah, you're the enemy, I'm gonna kill you." No. They kind of they sit down at the pool. And then they make an agreement. Right? The first thing they say is they suggest, let's have a small group of youngins duke it out. Get the young men to do it. And it doesn't say that specifically, but from the way it plays out, I assume this means let's have the best and the brightest represent our group, and let's have them fight each other, and whoever wins will kind of take control. Take the win for the house. So it kind of starts off simple and organized. They get to choose their 12 from their side to represent them, and then they go at it. However, as we read, you notice in that short verse, the description of these fights suggests that it was deadly, bloody, quick, and evenly matched. It says, each man thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So it's brutal, absolutely brutal. Continuing with the story, verses 17 to 23. The battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the Israelites were defeated by David's men. The three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. He chased Abner, turning neither to the right nor to the left as he pursued him. Abner looked behind him and asked, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It is," he answered. Then Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons." But Asahel would not stop chasing him. Again Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit. So Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there and died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. I'm going to now read the end of this chapter, just these 3 short verses. Joab stopped pursuing Abner, assembled the whole army. Besides Asahel, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. They took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb at Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. So, as we see here, the beginning with the matches, between the 12 of Abner's and 12 of Joab's, it's kind of like an appetizer, right? It was originally supposed to maybe decide the way things were going to go, but it didn't work out. Because it was evenly matched. They all killed each other. They all died. So how's that going to work out? And so, all of a sudden, after that failed, just a quick, fierce battle. Everyone just started fighting. And as we saw here, David's men completely took the pace. They won the battle. Abner lost 360 men. David only lost 20. In spite of that huge difference, that part was mentioned only as an afterthought. It's almost like it didn't matter as much that David's men took the victory. The most crucial part of the story, the center of it, was that fight that I just read between Asahel and Abner. This is what took the focus of the narrative. Now, when we get introduced to Asahel, right away, what do we see? It says his specialty was speed. He was fleet-footed, like a wild gazelle. Certainly not a simile that we would use in the modern day of US of A, but you get the point. I'm sure, you may have not seen a gazelle, but I'm sure you know that a gazelle is pretty fast. Honestly, all animals are pretty fast except for humans, interestingly enough. But he was fast. Abner couldn't outrun him. And then we see him get to talking. And since they were the leaders of their respective groups, right? They knew each other. It's not like Abner and Asahel just saw each other and started fighting. There was a conversation going on. And he even asked him, "Is that you?" And he told him to stop chasing him. And so the way this whole thing plays out, as you read it, it sounds somewhat tragic. Asahel was determined to chase down and kill Abner. Abner didn't want anything to do with it, right? He said, "Stop chasing me. Go fight someone else. Look, there are young men to the left and to the right. Go somewhere else. There are all these people for you to kill. Why are you bothering with me?" And we saw it wasn't because Abner was afraid of Asahel, right? He wasn't like, "Oh, don't stop chasing me. You're so scary." It wasn't like that, right? It was like, "Stop chasing me. If I kill you, this is gonna be really bad because I know your brother. Regardless, he was afraid of the consequences of killing Asahel. And in self-defense, I mean, if Abner didn't strike Asahel, he for sure would have been killed by him. So he struck him with the spear. It reads that he struck him with the butt of the spear, which I assume is the back, and somehow it still pierced him through. So that did not. If he was trying to take it easy on him, I don't think it worked out very well. And Asahel's speed apparently failed him when it counted the most. Being as fast as a wild gazelle didn't apparently matter much when he gets struck once and dies. So we're just going to jump ahead. The war between these two houses, it continues actually for a long time. As we kind of read, David was king over a portion of Israel, so for 7 years. So you can imagine it's probably 7 years, a war of 7 years, right? A turning point happened, however. Ishbosheth accused Abner of something he didn't do. We're not going to talk about what he accused him of, but it wasn't a nice accusation. And so Abner was so insulted. He's like, I mean, I was so loyal to you all this time, and you accused me of something so dumb. And so he decided, oh, well, I've had enough. I'm going over to David's. I can't believe I served you. And so David made an agreement with Abner and allowed Abner to go in peace. So this should have been a happy ending for David, right? But as we know, it's the Bible. Nothing ever goes that smoothly. So what happens, right? Joab hears about this peace agreement with Abner, and he can't believe it. The moment he hears about this, he was out fighting battles, and he comes back and he hears that Abner makes peace with David, and he accuses Abner of being a dirty liar. So Abner doesn't like this one bit. He secretly summons. Joab doesn't like this one bit. He secretly summons Abner back, pretends to have something to discuss with Abner, brings him to a private chamber, and then murders him behind closed doors. And it states specifically that he did this to avenge his fallen brother Asahel. What was David's response? We're going to read verses from 31 of the next chapter, pretty much the end. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth. Walk in mourning in front of Abner." King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron. The king wept aloud at the tomb, and all the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. "Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked." And all the people wept over him again. The king said to his men, "Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak. These sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds." If you ever really get to know David by reading the stories about him in the Bible, this response should not come as a surprise. But if you are unfamiliar with David, this may be kind of surprising. It's not what you'd call a common response. Sure, what happened to Abner was murder. You can't come at it any other way. It was for revenge. However, as we talked about, Abner was an enemy for a really long time. For 7 years, they must have been at war. And it was this huge final moment that they made peace. And David just made a commotion as a result of this murder. He made this huge ceremony. He told all the people to mourn him, even the guy who killed him. It says, David said to Joab, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth." So he even tells the guy who killed him, to mourn for the guy he killed. He called him a great man. Now, I wanted to read through this story today because, I wanted to talk about the fact that we are all, only human. And this story covers a wide range of human emotions and human faults. You see the horrors of human war, even between people who are supposed to be, part of the same country, the Israelites. Like we saw this kind of brutal fight in the very beginning where they kind of just grabbed each other and stabbed each other to death. And you see the blind ambition of Asahel. I mean, he really wanted to kill Abner, no matter what. He just kept chasing one guy. And so this led to his death. And in turn, his death led to hatred, vengeance by Joab. And David, we didn't get to read about that, but David initially was overjoyed when Abner came to see him to seek peace. He really just wanted peace between the Israelites. But that joy just ended up being sorrow because Abner died. With great respect for Abner, David mourned him. Now, as we're reading this story, one thing I really like about this story is all the little bits and pieces of dialogue. In terms of telling a story, dialogue isn't always necessary, especially when it comes to the Bible. A lot of times in the Bible, things are just kind of told simply and clearly, right? It happens very often. For many stories in the Bible, we don't get to hear the voices of the people. Sometimes we don't even get to see their names. When Moses killed that Egyptian in Egypt, what was his name? We don't know. It just says Moses killed the Egyptian, right? Even Pharaoh doesn't have a name. And Moses was the one to write that book. I mean, he was there, and he doesn't even bother to name the guy. But here, these characters, some of them that they don't really have big parts in the Bible. I mean, they don't get talked about much at all. It's such a short story, such a small part of this book. Yet we get bits of interaction between these people. And so, the way I see it is all this dialogue, all this interaction, it really humanizes these people, these historical figures. These are people. They have relationships. Maybe they know each other. They have feelings. They have histories. These are human beings that are caught in war and caught ultimately in sin. Some of their deeds are good, some of them are evil, and some of them are somewhere in between. And that's undoubtedly human, right? God teaches us to love our neighbors as ourselves. He teaches us to love our enemies. And it can be really difficult to love our enemies when we dehumanize them. I think this becomes an even bigger problem now that we have this whole internet age. We're born with access to the internet. I mean, this is something that can't be said for all, like 99% of all existing human history, right? 99.999%, right? This is just a small. This is something that we were born in, and something maybe we take for granted. But people didn't have the internet. People didn't have just some way to just instantly communicate with strangers all across the world anonymously. Or we didn't really have that kind of access to fast news about people across the world instantly, and you get to see them and talk about them. And in this modern internet age, a lot of the times the expressions we use can be hyperbole, exaggerations to show perhaps strong feelings. But I think we should be more careful with the way we use these expressions. Now, of course, I'm not going to spell out what I'm talking about. If you've been on the internet, you hopefully will know what I'm talking about when people talk about, in terms of the way that people actually talk about other people. So I apologize for having to be vague about it, but some of the language people use to describe other people or talk about people can be very vulgar and demeaning. People sometimes use phrases that may as well be like death threats. Or people will call other people names that are very hurtful and treat the person as if they aren't a person. I think this happens both anonymously on the internet in terms of forums and threads and talking to people online on chat or on various social media like Twitter and Facebook, or just talking about public figures as well. People like to talk about them as if they're a character, like they're not a human being. But I just want to give a friendly reminder that ultimately we are all human. It doesn't matter, even if you can't see them face to face. It doesn't matter if you can't talk to them face to face. Even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. I know sometimes people get riled up and start seeing people differently because of their actions. But as followers of Christ, we need to work with a different mentality. And this, I think this comes, I was reading something on the internet that kind of caught my eye. So this part I won't be vague about. It's not really like because it's not that vulgar, but it's a guy called someone else literal trash, right? That's an expression. Certainly, the guy is not literally trash, but that's kind of how internet language has become, right? We just call people whatever we want to call them. Call people cancer, call people trash. They're trying to come up with terms that express our disgust, our feelings. But when we do that, it kind of really dehumanizes people, right? It's like they're not human. And when we separate ourselves from that feeling, if we separate ourselves from understanding who they are, then we open up this whole thing of ways we can insult them without feeling bad about it ourselves. And so we see here this is a different mentality. We see David and Abner, right? Especially when we talk about enemies, right? When we have someone that we're not that we don't like, we're more easily able to turn them into a demon or a monster or something. We think of them as someone who's not really human. But David really viewed this Abner guy as a human being. He didn't see him as a demon. He didn't see him as a monster. He didn't see him as just another enemy to kill. He didn't see him as like someone who he really hated. Instead, he mourned his death. So today, just like David, we're gonna also have to deal with people with a lot of different opinions. We can't agree. No, I don't think any one person agrees with any other person entirely on everything. We're always going to have disagreements, especially as Christians in this world that's not Christian. They're going to disagree with us. They're going to disagree with the Bible. And no matter how they view us, we need to view them as God would view them. Because after all, we're all just fallen human beings. We all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So I'd like just to end with a reading of Matthew 43 to 45. This is from Jesus, and Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." Let's end in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you, Lord, for all your stories in the Bible. Some of them can be hard for people to talk about, for people to listen. Maybe hard to pay attention to. But I just pray, Lord, that we would take all your words to heart. A lot of the stories in the Bible may not make instant sense to us, but I just pray, Lord, that as we read them and dwell on them, that that they would still work through our lives, giving us a new perspective, a biblical perspective, as we live through this world of sin and darkness, of danger and disaster and terror and war. And I just pray, Lord, that you would give us peace in our hearts, enable us to show the goodness of our hearts to this world, Lord, that people may see us as your children. And I pray all this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.